All right. We're here with Mr. John Weeks of the Libertarian Institute. What's going on, brother?
Not too much, my man. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, no doubt. I've been meaning to ask you to come on for probably about 3, 4 months now, and it keeps slipping my mind. I get distracted, you know. Uh,
Same. I'm
So
excited to be here.
yeah, this is gonna be a fun one. Um, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about this the shutdown, but before we get into the shutdown, I wanted to talk a little bit about USAID. I found it quite interesting that since the cuts have been going on to USAID, they've been moving a lot of the I guess quote unquote legit positions of the government functioning, and the aid that USAID was actually involved in overseas, with like the AIDS uh, epidemic, and getting medicine out to African countries and stuff like that. They've moved a lot of that over to the State Department, and it seems like they've rooted out at least like what I would consider the majority of the corruption, which was, interacting with color revolutions overseas. And it seems like the left has kind of calmed down about the lack of funding going from the federal government to the NGOs. Do you have any news on that? Do you have any opinions on what's going on there and why they've kind of gotten quiet on the subject?
I mean, I think the left doesn't really care about helping people in other countries. So I don't think that's really what it's about. And I think in terms of all of the NGOs, USAID, NED, uh, overtly doing what the CIA likes to covertly do, like they're gonna find a way. So I think a big part of the backlash was just the identity politics of they hate Trump so
So
much.
I thought they were I thought truly what I thought the problem was, I thought they were upset that it was going to interrupt the funding to like Arabella and Tides Foundation, Open Society Foundations, things like that. That's really what I thought they were really, really upset about. And I'm just wondering if do you, do you think maybe that would there be a way for them to take federal dollars at the state level and funnel them into these NGOs, or how closely monitored is that money that goes to the states from the federal government?
I mean, I'm sure they could find a way
Yeah, I
to
mean, yeah.
to make it happen. I mean, in Scott Horton, Institute Director's book Provoked, he talks a lot about the nexus of governments, NGOs, European organizations, just a massive network um, of money being sent all over the place and different censorship regimes being enacted. So I'm sure that they can find a way to make it happen. But I mean, I do agree with you that it did seem like real. Like it did seem like they were really taking an axe to some corruption and some actual corrupt people were really feeling it and were really upset by it. But I just think that like the average leftist who was protesting, in their head, they're like, I hate Trump and whatever Trump does. And oh no, we were helping poor people in Africa. But they don't
Mm.
really care about those people. So the steam went out of that protest movement and they just moved on to the next thing, ICE or, whatever it may be.
See, and I think that was a big mistake on their part, because when everybody's focused on what Trump is doing by labeling Antifa a foreign terrorist organization, sending in, a couple of hundred National Guard into the streets to protect ICE facilities from what I mean can't be called anything else other than some like terroristic activities. I mean, when you incur violence for political purposes, that's obviously terrorism of some sort, and that's
When
what.
you're not a state.
Yeah, that obviously. Yes, it's still terrorism, but that's another subject for another day. I don't look at, and maybe we'll get into this here in a little bit, but I don't necessarily look at what's going on to be a problem of state and not state actors. I look at it as a problem of two state actors vying for power, and it's either and the only sides to choose are the side that you feel is going to be, less authoritarian on you and what's better for your children or your family moving forward. But like I said, we might tie that in here later on in the conversation. So what this has opened up for Donald Trump is to continue this bombardment on these NGOs. And I think it's funny he keeps bringing up George Soros and Reid Hoffman. Reid Hoffman, I know, operates in the U.S. regularly, has businesses that operate in the U.S. But one of the names that I heard mentioned at the roundtable by a journalist who's been doing some work, I think he said for the Quincy Institute on this subject, he mentioned Hans-Jörg Wyss. And you don't hear a lot of people bring up the name Hans-Jörg Wyss, but he's a Swedish billionaire who's been funneling money through Arabella and funneling money to the DNC through Arabella, which is a NGO that he started along with some other people. And so you got the Soros Open Society, you have the Tides Foundation that Soros is involved in. They've been doing work for USAID, which is why Putin in 2015 had kicked the right had publicized it as he kicked Soros out of Russia, but that's not what happened. He kicked out Open Society out of Russia. So he kicked out the Open Society foundations and all the smaller foundations that get their funding from Open Society out of Russia because he was able to trace the money through Open Society Foundation and these smaller NGOs into financing the snow revolution in 2011. And it wasn't until Maidan in 2014 that it opened his eyes to what was actually happening. So that's why in 2015 he had kicked Open Society out of Russia. And now you're looking at Donald Trump looking at doing the same thing here in the US. And so because these NGOs are openly funding these leftist organizations, whether it's Rose City Antifa, whether it's the John Brown Club, Gun Club, whatever, you got money that's coming out of these NGOs down through their system of smaller NGOs and hitting into these foundations. Like it was traced back early on that Tides Foundation, who was receiving money from USAID, was funneling money into BLM, right? So it was tax funders paying for BLM to, you know, to do all these like
Destabilize the regime.
well to not only destabilize the regime but to get involved in all these corrupt money laundering scams in which they're buying these multi-million-dollar mansions all over the country and marking it off as a tax write-off, for business purposes or for um, tax exempt purposes due to it being voluntarily 501(c)(3), I believe. So you had all this criminal activity was being financed by the taxpayers. And they were able to trace back, like, they can't trace back exactly where this dollar that USAID gave to Arabella or Tides Foundation went, but they can say, well, because money is fungible and we are financing this much of the NGO's projects, then that opens up a broader array of wealth for them to utilize for these tactics to destabilize the United States.
100%. I think two two perspectives I really like to think about in terms of this is Justin Raimondo's idea of libertarian realism, the idea that you should always think about foreign policy as founded and intertwined with domestic political realities. And then the work of uh, Keith Knight, managing editor at the Institute, his book, Domestic Imperialism, the idea that the national government is essentially at war with the domestic population of the United States, sort of a low level counterinsurgency, and that the domestic population is essentially conquered, already given up, but they have to be kept under control. And so you see this interesting mirror image of what's going on with the foreign policy, what's going on in the domestic policy, tactics that get used overseas, then get used here. You have, you know, employees from the State Department in other countries lecturing their government officials about LGBTQ issues and hey, you got to hang up the pride flag and stuff like that. And you have the real sort of hard edge of empire also being carried out where governments are being toppled and connected corporations that are connected to the US empire are getting concessions and getting trade deals and getting access to the natural resources. Um, so what's really funny, keeping those two ideas in mind, is the way uh, that Scott Horton um, lays out the RussiaGate hoax, RussiaGate scandal. And
Mm-hmm.
there, yeah, really, it just looks like all of these agencies within the US government, CIA, FBI, and all these NGOs and the captive media were essentially waging a color revolution against Trump
Mm-hmm.
during his first term in office. And so what I think is kind of fun to try to wrap my head around is like, well, is what are really the top priorities for these people in power? It seems like there's just a lot of different organizations, a lot of different billionaires with their own agendas, the different corporate agents within the state. Like I've met people who have worked for relatively small organizations that are funded either directly or indirectly from open society. And I always
Mm-hmm.
joke around with them. I'd be like, "Oh, you're getting that Soros money," and they get
Mm-hmm.
really upset. And it's like these aren't these. I wouldn't characterize them as bad people. They're like generally leftist or liberals, and they want to make their community better, however they may um, conceive of. They certainly weren't like actively trying to overthrow the government or
Right.
destabilize things. But
Right.
then it does seem that, in higher up echelons of the game, that certainly seemed to be the intention. And I think, I mean, it's not my idea, but many people have put forth the idea that part of uh, the COVID response was really a reaction to the Trump administration and like, hey, we got to shut things down. We got to slow down the economy. If we kind of crash the country, that's good because we can blame it on Trump
Mm-hmm.
and we can defeat him in his reelection campaign. And that's really what it's all about because if he gets reelected, that's the end of democracy.
Right.
So
And
here's Trump. So here's Trump, and Trump is now the head of the empire again. And he's got all these agencies that like he really needs to run his empire if he wants to like whatever, like overthrow the government in Moldova. But they're a threat to him, right? So I think you put it beautifully, different state actors vying for power, behind the scenes, a lot of ways, spilling out into the streets.
mm-hmm.
Um, but I just think that the most nefarious state actors, the most serious about power, well, they'll find a way to get their funding.
Mm. Yeah, I believe that too. I think my point, maybe I didn't get to it, as succinctly as I should have, was that by distracting with this whole Antifa idea, and going after Antifa, labeling them as a foreign terrorist organization. I mean, you see me in the chat, I'll make jokes, like gender queers to Gitmo and stuff like that, because I just sounds like something Trump would throw up on a t-shirt or on a poster or something. And that might be one of his next tweets for all I know. Who knows? But what I think what's really happening is this is another way, just like going after USAID was a way to get after these NGOs that are corruptly funding the Democratic Party, these color revolutions around the world. He's utilizing Antifa's role in around these ICE facilities. He's utilizing that as another backdoor to hit these NGOs from another angle. And what we're probably looking at a situation where a lot of these, I don't think that we're going to see billionaires, start getting rounded up and put in prison. Like I don't see that as a realistic expectation. If people are expecting a bunch of arrests to come from these investigations into these NGOs, I don't think that's what is going to happen. But I think what will happen is something similar to what Glenn Beck has been doing with the chalkboard for, however many years, 20 years now. He's been working them chalkboards and going through these foundations and how this money funnels through these corrupt organizations and gets to, you know, gets to ground forces like By Any Means Necessary or Rose City Antifa, whatever it may be. They're going to be able to lay it out for the entire media specter to begin to write about. Like the John Solomons and these type of people are going to be able to start publishing. Matt Taibbi, who's really good. I don't agree with him on economics, but he's very good about writing about the economic corruption of the federal government. He did a really good job of doing that around the housing crisis in 2008. That's kind of where he made his a name for himself. Glenn Greenwald. These guys are going to start getting this information, seeing the way that these actors, these NGOs have been acting on behalf of government and how they've been funneling their money and the crimes and corruption that they've been involved in. And it's going to all get exposed. And Trump is using this whole Antifa angle and people's legit fear of crime and chaos and anarcho tyranny on their streets in order to backdoor the funding mechanisms of this corrupt regime that has been acting behind the scenes for so long, aka the deep state, I guess you would say. I think we froze. Well, it says that. Oh, he's gone. Oh, I'm sure he'll be back in a minute. I don't edit, so I'm going to just pause real quick here. Okay, I told you he'd be back. That didn't take very long. And to everybody else, it's like they blinked their eye and you were right back. Yeah. So,
The
so did you? I don't know if you caught everything I was saying.
last thing I heard was you were talking about like journalists like Matt Taibbi being able to write in depth about
Yeah,
all these networks,
they're
lay
effective
them out on the
communicators.
chalkboard.
Yes, yes. Like they're effective communicators, and I think what Trump's doing, he's positioning himself in order to backdoor these NGOs and use Antifa as another doorway to go after this corrupt funding mechanism that operates on behalf of the deep state.
I would love to read those articles.
I would too.
I hope that's what's happening.
Yeah. I mean, because that's one of the reasons I've always been a big Glenn Beck fan. It's not because I listen to his radio show. It's because I enjoy him breaking down these chalkboards and point in connecting all these dots. And I'm like, oh, that makes sense. I see how this money is traveling from here and getting into the pockets of these people and how they're working not together, but in conjunction. They work like kind of like on parallels, is who was the who's the leftist philosopher that was talking about like the media atmosphere, and he's like I don't think that the media, like the journalists in mainstream media, are given talking points. I believe that they already had to believe the things that they're spouting on air in order to even be considered for the job, you know? And it's that type of deal. It's the way they work hand in hand, not
Is that
because
Chomsky?
yes, it was Chomsky. Thank you. I'm terrible with names. I can barely remember my kids' names. It's one of my major weaknesses is names.
I really do, hope that we do get to see really good reporting about all this nefarious activity, how these groups connect, how the funding flows. Um, Back to Scott's book Provoked, when he talks about the Maidan revolution of dignity or the Western backed coup in Ukraine in 2014. I just always thought it was crazy the way he lays it. Like, you've got the protesters in the streets in the winter, it's cold, and someone is paying for heaters, blankets, porta potties, food, rock concerts.
Hmm.
Like, what? Imagine being like,
Yeah, Bono is not showing up for free.
imagine being like the government officials and being like, what the hell? And to think that the same sort of tactics are being used in America. Like, if it was China doing that, we'd be at war.
Hmm.
Um, so it's this nexus of the Democratic Party and the deep state and foreign billionaires and all these groups. Like, that's
Man, looks like we froze again. Hopefully it picks back up here in just a second. But what he's saying makes a lot of sense. You can think about this the last presidential election with Kamala Harris and all the leaks that came out about her paying for these musicians and entertainers to come to her events in order to draw an audience to make it look like she was attracting as big of an audience as Donald Trump was. And it's really just trying in some way trying to pull a fast one over the public by funding these entertainers and attracting larger audiences. There he is. I was keeping the audience uh, entertained, talking about what you were saying about the billionaires funding these entertainers to come in, and we got a little piece of that uh, with the reporting after Kamala Harris's campaign and how she had been paying like Beyonce and Oprah and all these entertainers to come through to draw bigger audiences to make it look like she was competitive with Trump as far as her popularity went.
the vibes.
Yep. Brett Summer. That didn't last very long. It didn't even make it through the summer.
I know, because you see like all the Antifa personnel mobilized in the streets, scuffling with other uh, residents, scuffling with the cops, fighting with ICE. And you're like, don't these people have jobs? And like, yeah, this is their job.
Hmm. A lot of them.
And there just isn't an equivalent like right wing um, apparatus because those people who would potentially be involved in some sort of group like that or like in the actual military or they're working a job.
Well, I heard somebody say, I think it was Richie McGinnis. I heard say something along the lines that when he was covering the riots of 2020, he was uh he was becoming aware that a lot of these activists were actually homeless that they were such ideological true believers that they believed that if you flooded the streets with drugs and homelessness, that it would act to topple capitalism quicker. And so they were for ideological reasons, they were intentionally living homeless lives in order to create more chaos on the streets for citizens to destabilize, the kind of to make the citizens less confident in the system in which they lived in order to destabilize capitalism and overthrow capitalism so they could usher in a Marxist regime.
Intriguing. Who was this?
I think it was Richie McGinnis. I think
Richie
that's
McGinnis.
yeah, he was the journalist who was there in Kenosha when Kyle Rittenhouse shot those guys.
Okay.
Yeah.
I gotta check that out. Well, that makes me think of Joseph Stalin. And there's a great it's gonna be a three-part biography on Stalin by the American historian Stephen Cochrane, but only the first two volumes are out yet. But one of his big themes in that book is that Stalin didn't like do everything he did because of who he was. He became who he was by doing that job.
Mhm.
And he didn't start out as just like uh, uh, wanting power. He started out with these actual sincere ideological beliefs.
Mhm.
And he could have maybe become a teacher, maybe become a priest, could have had a pretty comfortable life. But instead, he chose to be a revolutionary. And he lived for almost 20 years in poverty, on the run from the cops, being arrested, being internally exiled to Siberia. I love that Russia is so big, they internally exile people. So it wasn't like he was like, I know what I'm going to do. I'm going to become the dictator of a new empire. So that's interesting that you have these uh, Antifa cats that are so ideologically committed that they're willing to be homeless. Those
Yeah,
are definitely some of the most dangerous people in our society. The people
absolutely.
are in it for the ideology and are willing to sacrifice like that.
Mhm.
Um, and it's funny that they have their ideology is like, here's what we'll do. We'll just like flood the streets with uh with crime and drugs, and then people will turn on capitalism, and then we'll get our Marxist dream. And it's like, yeah, maybe, or maybe you'll get something else.
Mhm.
Like you're playing with some serious fire.
Yeah. Yeah. I know. And I mean, I know a lot of right wingers, like hard right wingers. And I'm not talking like neo-Nazis or anything like that, but like they're much harder right than I am. And they're like, they'll say things like, if they keep this up, the normies, the regular population that don't pay attention to politics are going to demand a Caesar or a Franco. And it's going to be bad for everybody. It's not just going to be bad for the left. It's going to be bad for everybody. These people don't understand the the tensions that they're playing with.
Yeah,
Maybe
I've
they do
never,
understand. Maybe they just believe so much in their ideology that they think that the average person will move to the left. But there's a reason that Marxism gave up on a workers' revolution. It's because that's not how average people think.
yeah, I've always thought, it's really funny. Scholars talk about this. Calkin talks about this, that in like Marx's plan, the revolution was supposed to happen in these more advanced Western capitalist bourgeois societies with parliaments. It wasn't supposed to happen in Russia where they have an autocracy and most of the people are peasants.
Mm,
He's like, we got to organize the workers unite.
Hmm.
not the peasants. So that the when the Tsar abdicated, the Bolsheviks were happy to let the provisional government take power because they're like, well, we could take power, but no, we have a plan. Our ideology says first you got to have this bourgeois capitalism, then you get your socialism, then you get your communism. And so for um, the current Antifa Marxists, to have their even crazier sounding ideology. Like, I don't know, yeah, really how much they're in touch with like the history of Marxism. And like years ago, when I first started hearing about like theories of cycles of history, it wasn't really that compelling to me. But through the work of Daryl Cooper, who's been called the most important historian in America, now I find that really compelling. This idea that like one human life could be potentially 100 years. And, but human civilization's been around, depending on how you want to define it, for 10,000 years. And the species has been around for a couple 100,000 years. And this idea that you do go through, if you were able to like have a perspective where you could just like watch humanity unfold this whole time, you probably would start to notice certain patterns. And you'd be like, yep, okay, I see what they're doing. So any moment now we're going to get a Caesar. Like that really makes a lot of sense. And I've noticed that like we'll be talking about stuff in our group chat and then I'll start seeing it on X. But then I'll hear people, we might call them normies, talking about it at the cafe,
Hmm.
talking about it at the bar, talking about it at the barbecue. Like it's filtering into the general population and people are angry. And like there's so much anger, there's so much hate, there's so much chaos that certainly a true, political entrepreneur could come along and probably establish something that no one was intending to have happen.
Hmm.
Certainly not the Antifa Marxist kids.
Yeah, that's kind of like when that reminds me about of when Michael Malice said they thought Trump was the flood, but he was actually the dam. You know, this was like the average person's idea of what a government and a president is basically Donald Trump. That's what the average person thinks. Like he is interested in solving the chaos that is surrounding these city centers in like Illinois and Portland when nobody, even the mayors and the governors of those states and cities, have had any interest in even looking at the problem. He's trying to end wars, overseas. This is how people have always voted. This is what they've always thought. When they voted for George W. Bush, they thought they were getting a president that was going to stop the conquest overseas. Well, they're seeing what Donald Trump's doing, and absolutely not perfect by any stretch of the imagination. I don't think I have to say that, but I will just to make my point clear. They see that there have been 7 wars stopped, potentially an eighth here with Israel and Gaza. And he's been working nonstop since he got in office 8 months ago, 9 months ago, whatever it was, to end the war in Ukraine. And he constantly talks about the loss of life, how terrible the loss of life is. And there's something refreshing hearing a president say that, talk like that. Like, I remember hearing somebody talk about Putin. And they say, yeah, Putin's not a good dude. But you know what's crazy about Putin is he has to act as if he's a Christian. He has to behave as if he's a faithful Christian. And that tells you a lot about the society in which he governs over. It doesn't really tell you much about him, but it tells you about the society and what that society expects in a leader. And to hear Trump come out and talk about peace and ending wars, even if he is only paying lip service to it or he's not as much of a peacenik as all of us would like, it tells you a lot about our culture at the moment. That's a very important mimetic idea that he's tapping into, that he has to constantly be talking about peace. And he's talking about order within these chaotic cities. I was thinking the other day um, about Rudy Giuliani putting it into the mafia there in New York City, right? When he was the Attorney General of New York City, and the war that he put on the mafia and how he ended the mafia. And I was like, he did that from a local level, from the city level. He operated in that way. Now, a lot of people say that the regions that the mafia controlled in New York City were much more orderly at that time when the mafia was in control than they are now. But putting that aside, like that's not even like a conversation worth having because what happened happened. But I was thinking about these gangs in Chicago, and I'm sure you heard my episode when I was talking about the amount of gangs and the amount of gang members in Chicago. And I was thinking like, well, 150,000 gang members in Chicago, separated over six different gangs. Granted, some of them, like Latin Kings, are going to be bigger than others. I wonder if there's an opportunity for someone to be able to penetrate, infiltrate these systems of organized crime that are operating in the cities like Chicago or like LA and put an end to the violence that is following this lifestyle, this gang culture that has perpetuated since the 90s. I remember, in the 90s, it was a big deal, you know? And so I was just thinking about that just kind of off the cuff. And I was like, I wonder if that's something that Trump is trying to do, but I think that possibly he's taking the wrong steps to do it.
I've always loved this saying, and I don't know who said this, so apologies to whoever this quote is, that that the object of the state is not to abolish crime, but to monopolize it.
Mm,
And the idea of the state as, having a monopoly on perceived legitimate initiatory aggression and violence. And how, yeah, when you have a lot of crime, people lose faith in the state. That perceived legitimacy starts to collapse. And
hmm
when it's organized, when you have gangs or cartels, organized groups that are initiating violence against the citizens, and the state is either powerless to do anything about it or is letting it happen for some ideological reasons,
hmm
and people really resent that.
hmm
And again, it creates a perfect opening for the next Caesar to come in. I had not had that idea that, well, is Trump trying to somehow, at least marginally improve the violence, if not outright coming in and smashing all these groups. But I saw this really interesting interview with a former Hell's Angel member recently, and he was talking about, and he was based in California, and he was saying like at some point, maybe it was the 90s, the past like few decades, there was a lot of drive-by shootings happening, and like the Hell's Angels ordered all these like top uh gang leaders to have a sit down, and they're like, you guys got to stop with these drive-by shootings. And they were able to, according to this guy, to get it to stop. They didn't like end gangs.
hmm
They were just like, stop doing the drive-by shootings because it's
Yeah.
bad for business. And it's, you know, too many like civilians are getting hit or whatever it may be. Yeah. Is there a way for the state to, you
Yeah. It's
know,
like a diplomatic. idea between gangs or something.
Right, because there's like the
It's kind of
idea of
like
like,
the idea of the five families coming together.
yeah, and they tell us like you can't negotiate with terrorists, but then they do negotiate with terrorists, you know, and they pay them
Hmm. I was going to say
and
they just buy
they
them. They don't negotiate. They just buy them.
make deals with them. So yeah, I mean, they could, there's the state and there's like so-called legitimate society, and then there's the underworld. Like the
Hmm.
underworld's out of control.
Hmm. Yeah.
Like have Trump sit down with all the top gang members, bring them to one of the golf courses, and say, "Look, we need more order. All right, every gang is going to have an FBI liaison official. He's going to make sure that your activities are conducted in a way that is conducive to an orderly society."
Hmm.
Yeah, I could definitely see Trump doing something like that.
I was just thinking, Obama had the beer summit. Trump's going to have the marijuana summit.
That would be awesome.
They're just sitting on the green, smoking green.
God bless America.
But yeah, man, I was thinking what brought that to my mind the other day is I was at work and I had heard about those. Apparently, there were some hits that came out from the Latin Kings on one of the top ICE officials. Um, and I was thinking about it, and I was like, I wonder if some of this that Trump's doing, especially in like Chicago, where the gang crime's so out of control, isn't due to his relationship with Giuliani and getting ideas from Giuliani about how to end organized crime. I don't know. It was just something I was just contemplating, and I was just like, I wonder if there's a way that the federal government could authorize the Attorney General of the United States to work on stings or within these gang communities. I wonder if that's something that's been going on. That goes on with any organization that pops up that is even smells right wing, like the Proud Boys or whatever. Half of them end up being feds or informants or whatever.
Yeah, I used to joke around my friends who were my more right-wing friends when they complain about BLM. I'd say, relax. Half those guys are FBI informants, and the other half are undercover FBI agents. It's all good. Um, I mean, I know historically the FBI likes to infiltrate everyone, but it does seem that there has been a bias in infiltrating, in demonizing these right-wing groups. And
I mean,
I
that's
think
been
part
going
of
on
that,
since OKC.
I think part of that is back to Keith Knight's idea of domestic imperialism. When you're looking at the foreign policy, the state demonizes foreign governments and their leaders. So it's Russia, the Russian state, and Putin as the personification of it. But when you're engaged in the domestic imperialism, well, the villain is the state. The state's not going to say, "Hey, I'm the villain."
Mm,
And there's a great quote from the libertarian scholar Robert Lefevre that the state is a disease masquerading as its own cure.
hmm.
So who, so what's the villain in our society? And I would say it's capitalism and like white supremacy or the white male patriarchal capitalist economic social order. And so, yeah, ever since OKC, that's a great, villain for the state to focus on. And did you ever watch the show The West Wing?
Yeah.
So I always thought it was just hilarious that like here's this depiction of the US government, the most powerful government that's ever existed. And like who's its big enemy? It's like these like white guys with hats. and like we know they're out there, and like we could crush them, but I'm President Bartlett, and I care about the Constitution. We can't just send the FBI. But like, what that's like, that's the domestic version of the Russian Empire or even Al Qaeda. So like, we're so caught up in that narrative that makes sense that like they'd have the FBI. Oh no, there's a militia, a bunch of white guys. Like they might want to destabilize the society. We got to go infiltrate them. When meanwhile, the society is being destabilized from the left. We've talked about this a little bit in the group chat, but the show The Boys.
I think I watched like first two seasons. That was the superhero show, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
So I've watched the first two seasons and like the first episode of the third season. And apparently the show like goes really woke or whatever. But I think that show does a great job of like of like interacting with the domestic imperialism and interacting with the narratives that Americans are so committed to. Because you have the evil corporation, VOT,
Mm.
which is a pharmaceutical company
Hmm.
and essentially a weapons manufacturer, but its weapons are the superheroes. And in the
Yeah.
first season, it's trying to get a contract with the Pentagon to get its superheroes into the military, you
Hmm.
know? And so the basic, like, you know, the show doesn't specifically like say this, but essentially what's saying is, look, like obviously like the Pentagon is good, is noble, is a righteous thing, but here's this evil corporation trying to infiltrate it for profit, for money. And turns out in the second season, guess who founded this evil corporation? A Nazi. So now we've got like the foreign evil state and the evil domestic capitalism working together against our great Pentagon. When in reality, as you know, libertarians confront, actually the real power is not at the evil corporation. It's at the Pentagon. And as Bill Bupert, military affairs analyst at the Institute, would say, uh, he wouldn't exactly say it like this. He would say that like a politician is a violence broker. So I kind of riff off that and say, so the Pentagon is a violence brokerage. Like
Mm.
that's what it is. But what's funny about that show is that the superheroes have this ultimate killing power. So they kind of are the like archetypal essence of the state. And when you see like the clash between like corporate management and the superheroes, you see like what's really at the end of the day dominant is that killing power
Hmm.
of these of the superheroes, not these guys in suits that are trying to make money off of selling stuff to the government.
Mm.
Um, so in terms of like you work at the FBI and you got like, you know, apparently they're not going to do it anymore, but you went to the training across the street at ADL headquarters,
Mm.
you know, and then you went and you took a tour of um the Holocaust Museum, and then you're actually like indoctrinated and convinced that like white supremacy is like a real serious problem out there, and I better, you know, be willing to like go undercover into the Proud Boys or whatever sort of thing. And to think that uh that Trump would be able to get the FBI to at least sort of rein in the crazy leftist groups. I mean, it's a nice thought.
Yeah. I mean, I think it has, like I said, again, I think it has more to do with the money. I know he's been talking about it. And whenever I saw him going after USAID, that was the first thing I thought was the NGOs. But let's talk a little bit about the shutdown. Because when the shutdown kicked in, Trump was talking about firing people. Russ Vought was out there talking all kinds of pornographic about firing people and how it was his wet dream since he was in eighth grade and all this good jazz. And That talk fizzled out over the weekend, and then they came in Tuesday. A memo was leaked that the employees that were furloughed are not going to get receive back pay. And I think this was Russ Vaught's kind of backdoor attempt to get some of these people to quit because, like, I think 100, it was somewhere between 100 and 150,000 federal employees quit the night that the government shut down, like hours before the government shut down. They quit because they were afraid they were going to be on the chopping block. These are employees that the Trump administration had tried to fire early on in the administration, and then the courts had come in and blocked him from firing employees of the executive branch, though he heads the executive branch. It's very confusing. This is what you get when you put unions in government. It's retarded. But like my idea about unions is I don't care what they do in the private sector. No government employee should be a member of a union. They should not have the rights for to a paycheck and to pay raises off of the taxpayer dollar just for the simple fact that they exist. But that's a complete and utter waste of time to talk about. So what Steve Bannon reported, I think it was Tuesday morning, he had reported that the leaks that he was getting out of the White House, out of the administration, was that donors were putting pressure on Thune and Johnson, and they were attempting to pressure Donald Trump to lay off the talks of firings and to not fire anybody because it was going to ultimately be bad for the donors. And so that's when you suddenly had this memo leaked that Russ Vought was like, okay, I'll stop talking about firing people. I'll just talk about not giving them back pay. How about that? We'll just give them a reason to quit. So, but that talk has also calmed down, and it was actually addressed yesterday on Two Way with Mark Halperin, Sean Spicer, and Dan Turrentine. And Mark Halperin was reporting that his sources are telling him that John Thune and Speaker Johnson are extremely upset with Russ Vought and have been basically just uh, assaulting, harassing Donald Trump about the language coming out of Russ Vought and OMB. So I don't know if we're to expect Donald Trump to take advantage of the situation, use the power of the executive that he has unchecked at the moment because government's not operating whatsoever. And so he has all this unchecked authority to end uh, all these administration, all these different three-letter agencies, and instead he's going to Israel, which great deal on the Israel deal. I'm not going to get all upset about that, but instead he wants to go over there and play patty cake with his buddies over in the Middle East, and I just don't get it. What do you think about that?
Well, I think the analysis of Trump that seems the most accurate to me is that he's just not really into following through. And he's swayed by the people around him. People will say, like, whoever the last guy in the room with Trump is, like, that's what he's going to do. But at the same time, he does seem to have a certain like perspective on what the job is that he's very consistent in doing. He pays a lot of attention to the narrative that's coming out, uh, the big TV shows and the newspapers. And he seems to have a really good feel for maneuvering.
He understands media very well.
Yeah. So he's really connected to that. And so, like, yeah, I could see him being like, all right, yes, we're gonna fire all these people. and then he kind of like, you know, takes his eye off the ball. Like when originally he was like, we're going to get out of Afghanistan, we're going to get it out of Syria. And then he gets sabotaged by his own military.
Hmm.
And instead of crushing those guys and firing them and hiring guys that would get the job done, you know, he didn't get us out of Syria, and he made the deal to get us out of Afghanistan. Probably one of the best things he's ever done in his life. But he wasn't able to
And
see it
then
through.
Biden botched that shit. So,
Yeah, I mean, Biden's all Biden had to do was just take the win,
mhm.
you know, and say, hey, this is great bipartisan uh, collaboration. Trump administration made this deal, but it's easy. They could have put talking points like it's easy to anyone can make a deal, but you got to follow through in the deal. And that's what we did.
Yep.
Biden was strong and followed through. Instead, oh no, let's do the worst of both worlds. Let's delay it so the fighting season is upon us. Because then when we do leave, it's a complete shit show. Like that seems like something that the Democrats and Biden would do, and yeah, they did it. So I could see Trump being like, I mean, this is not the military pushing back against him, which I mean it's a serious some serious cats that pushing back against you. So if I could see him like, even being in Israel and watching Fox News and being like, do it, fire him, just do it. Or I
Hmm.
could see him being like just like forgetting about it for a while. Um,
Well,
but
and I think the people that are surrounding him aren't going to let him forget about it. Like Russ Vought, I really believe wants to fire half of Washington. I think that's his personality. Same with like Stephen Miller and Scott Bessent. I think they really despise the people that work in the federal government and they want them gone. So I don't think he's going to not hear about it and he's going to forget about it. But it really does seem like the donors, from what Bannon is reporting, is the donors are putting a lot of pressure on John Thune and Johnson and Speaker Johnson.
why are the donors so concerned?
It's bad for optics. I don't know. I mean, that's all I can figure. I mean, we're what, a year out of the midterms, so I think it has a lot to do with that. I think they're thinking like if we go through and we fire like what 200, let's say 250,000, even though Russ Vought floated out 750,000 the other day. I almost had an orgasm while driving. Um, so I'm just saying, but let's say they fire 250,000 employees of the federal government. I mean, that's 250,000 out of 2.4 million federal employees, right? We're not going to fill that on the ground. Like normal people aren't going to like fill anything from that. But it does cut down some of the financial responsibilities of the federal government. So then you start looking at how cutting these these six-figure paychecks, you cut 250,000 six-figure paychecks, that starts to add up.
I can see people being wait a minute, like you just fired quarter of a million people and like nothing in my life changed. Like, what is the government even doing?
150,000 people just quit and nobody's noticed a thing. Like nothing has changed. They're moving portions of the Department of Education. So, like the voucher program for like school lunches and stuff like that, they're moving it over to the Department of Agriculture, who actually maintains WIC and food stamps and stuff like that. It's like, because that's what they do all the time. So, like, why do we have this Department of Education doing duplicate work? Like, you could just move that funding, that source over here, and we can get rid of this Department of Education. And it's like, yeah, that makes sense.
That's funny.
It-
That makes me think about like the America's nuclear strike policy that Scott talks about sometimes, where it's like the Air Force wants to hit him, and you got to hit him at least two or three times in case you know the first one's a dud. But the Navy wants to hit him a few times. And so you have like just massive overkill.
Hmm.
So you have these different government bureaucracies. Hey, agriculture wants to help the kids, but hey, so does Department of Education. That should be our job. And
Hmm.
so yeah, we'll just we'll have you both do it. We'll just waste money.
Yeah.
Classic, classic state bureaucracy at work.
Right. Vivek Ramaswamy did a lot of talking about this whenever he was actually in the presidential race, and he was talking about how you have these different federal agencies that are doing all this overlapping work. So you have like the ATF, the DEA, the FBI, and they're all operating like overlapping in operations, but none of them are sharing like intelligence with each other and information with each other on these different um, cases that they're working. And so they're working all these different cases from different. He's like, cut out all the overlap. He's like, if you have one agency that overlaps with three different agencies, get rid of that agency and distribute that work along into those other three agencies. You don't need that extra agency. It's not doing anything extra for you, you know. And that I mean, it's just common sense type stuff that a lot of these guys are talking about. And the left is losing their fucking minds because the right is trying to end a jobs program. You know, it's like at
Yeah, come on, Tommy. This is government. It's not about getting the job done. It's about
well,
doing the job.
yeah, it's like when Mises went over to China and they had like 100,000 Chinese digging trenches with shovels, and he's like, "Why don't you just use heavy equipment?" And then Chinese government goes, "Well, it's a jobs program." He goes, "Okay, why not give them spoons?" It's like, yeah, you can create more jobs if that's what your goal is, but I mean, come on.
Jobs. And it's a great place to just indoctrinate people.
Mm.
Like in,
Well, it's the parasite class. It's the extension of the parasite class, right? So you have the welfare moms and the impoverished that they keep on welfare and they trap in this cycle that depend on government for their existence. But then you also have like the bourgeoisie, so to speak, that depend on government for their existence because they're all, you know, you got 2.5 million people working six-figure jobs in the government. Half of them don't even have to show up. They can sit at home and collect their paychecks. And so yeah, you're creating a voter block of people dependent on government for their well-being. And so we've gotten to a point where the parasite class is beginning to outnumber those of us that actually work for a living. I've often called it the parasite class versus the productive class.
I like that. And it makes me really understand why so many uh, ancient and modern political thinkers, philosophers hated democracy,
Mm,
and why so many people said you should limit who can vote and who can hold office
right.
along many different lines. I mean, right now we limit it by age, but specifically by are they a net taxpayer?
Yeah.
Which makes perfect sense. Like, if you have this organization that has this power to tax, and it's beholden to people that don't produce anything, what do you think is going to happen?
Yeah. They're just going to vote themselves more shit
Yeah,
that
I remember.
that the net taxpayer has to pay for. Eventually, the net taxpayer runs out of fucking money. Then the government starts printing money, and we go 37 trillion in debt. I wonder how the fuck that happened.
I remember Lou Rockwell wrote a great article like 20 years ago where he's like, look, the Democrats, they're the party of government.
Hmm.
So all the people that work in government, they tend to vote Democrat. And then the Republicans, they're the party that's like, well, how can I use the government to give me an advantage? to, subsidize my business? How can I like, just steal whatever I can? Whereas a lot of uh the Democrats, they actually sincerely want government to work. They think it can work, but they are, yeah, their whole paycheck comes from government.
Hmm.
So like what does it mean when government's working? Really, it means that government is just like addressing the problem, not
Yeah.
solving it, just addressing it.
Hmm.
And it's funny that and Scott and Daryl Cooper on their show Provoked recently talked about this, that essentially the national government and as well as like state and municipal governments after World War II started waging this like insidious counterinsurgency against the black population and coming in and being like, hey, we'll help you. You can get money for food and for rental assistance and for fuel assistance, but only if you kick the husband out of the house.
Yeah. Yeah.
So just
Thomas
basically
Sowell's written
like,
about this too.
yeah, I mean, just horrific. Just basically like we're going as if like they sat down, had a meeting, and they're like, let's just destroy black people.
Hmm.
Let's destroy like as to the extent that it's like a community or a group. Let's impoverish it and destroy it by pretending to help it. But then you see you have like, I'm sure you've met people like this, like some really like well-intentioned young woman. She just got out of college. She's like, I'm gonna go help fight the poverty, and now she has a job at an agency that exists to fight this problem. She doesn't even realize, because the human life is so short, the whole force of history behind this. She's just like, oh, look at these people, they're suffering. And it's
Hmm.
like, yeah, you're part of the organization that made them suffer. You are part of the disease masquerading as the cure.
Three
And
years
now your
later, she has a
paycheck.
nose ring, green hair, and she's a lesbian. It's fucking crazy.
Look, I don't care who she sleeps with
There's no
as long
sleeping
as it's
involved.
consenting adults. But the fact that she's getting paid tax money to solve this problem that the agency she works for created
Created.
and is continuing uh to proliferate. That's like crazy. And like it's funny to think that like probably so many people probably go their entire lives and like never think about this or never realize this, never see this. But once like someone explains it to you, like like a Mises or a Rothbard,
Mhm.
you know, uh, or Salmon or a Horton, then it's like you can't unsee it. You're like, oh my God, this is horrific.
I used to have a friend that had the best line about lesbians. He always said it was a waste of perfectly good pussy.
You do have some right wing friends.
I do. I grew up in Texas. Well, I've always considered, and we'll end on this note because it's been about an hour, and I got to get ready for another podcast here in a little bit. And I'm
Oh,
still
hell
reading
yeah.
on the Spanish Civil War, so um so I just got my book in today. I started reading. Um,
Nice.
but I've always considered libertarianism right wing, and the reason is the people that I grew up around were very conservative people, and they were definitely right wingers. But they were all about their sovereignty, their autonomy, working for what they get, and having as much liberty as possible. Now, we can debate the links to liberty that one should have and that is acceptable for a society, depending on the size of a community, the society. Like you can look at Mooresnet, who is basically an anarchist society in between two large countries, but it was a small mining community, and the people didn't weren't vying for power. So we can talk about all those things, and all those things are great in theory, and to look at those situations and instances are awesome. But I've always considered libertarianism more right wing because it's more self sufficient, more um, thinking about shrinking government, which every right winger I've ever met, every conservative I've ever met, always constantly talks about it. Now, when the politicians get in there, they get bought, paid for, etc. I get it. I'm not arguing with the functionality. I'm talking about people on the ground, just your average everyday people that you deal with, whether they're right or left wing. And the left wingers have always begged for larger government, more government function, government to be more involved in everyday activities. And so I've always kind of like looked at libertarianism as more of a right wing ideology. And so I've never really lost that. You know, I've read different things like on social standards, et cetera, et cetera. I think Ron Paul had it figured out when he said abortion shouldn't be illegal; it should be unthinkable. I think that's the right way to mentally think about these things. Um, but so why or why not is libertarianism not right wing or left wing?
Well, I think your perspective tracks with my experience 100%, where I think I got into libertarianism through being just so disgusted by Iraq War II. And at first, really just reading all the um, standard leftist and liberal anti-war writers like Chomsky,
Hmm.
but then discovering Lou Rockwell in antiwar.com and ultimately Scott Horton.
Jeff Deist, like there's some really good thinkers.
And so being exposed to a lot of people who I would consider conservative or right wing, but who are also anti war, and then who also made a lot more sense when it came to economics. Where like, I always had the sense that like the leftists just, I don't understand the economics, but they don't understand it either. It doesn't make any
Hmm.
sense
Hmm.
what they're talking about. Like this vague, slogans like we got to smash capitalism or, this is late stage capitalism. This is what happens. It just always seemed like some bullshit to me. And then you get people actually who seem to
No, this
understand.
is early stage Marxism.
But see, you always have to blame capitalism's the villain. You
Hmm.
always have to blame capitalism for what the state's doing. Um, so then over the past like 20 years, like I've seen myself become more right wing
Hmm.
from being in libertarian circles and from reading the different literature and from just observing what's going on in society and talking to family and friends and just increasingly being really annoyed, shall we say, with leftists and just listening to the little like or I shouldn't say the little, but like the the analysis that they offer, the things that they complain about, the way that they can't see that the state is creating the problems that it claims to be fighting, like
Hmm.
at all. And then when you point it out to them, they're just so locked into this simple narrative, like a TV show narrative, that they just like they shut down. Like you ever see that show Westworld?
Yes, I
When you
love
tell
that
the
show.
That's a great show, right? When the people tell the host like, you're a robot, right? You're an android or whatever. They just like they can't interact with that. They're programmed to just completely ignore that, you know.
Hmm.
So if you say that to like a leftist, like, actually like the Federal Reserve System is like not helping the working class. There's like I can't interact with that, you know. So yeah, so like I feel myself like have moved way farther from the leftists and more right. But I think the reason that libertarians are really not right wing or left wing is because of the focus on the individual and the voluntary association, voluntary exchange, and collective action. And this is something that I love about Keith Knight is he's like, it's not the individual versus the collective. Collectives are fine as long as they're
Hmm.
voluntary.
Hmm.
But so a true right winger is like, we're going to use state power to crush the left. Whereas libertarians, because of our view on the state as like this monster, we're like, well, completely empathize with that feeling. But when you start doing that, you should expect unintended consequences. You should expect to create more problems, and like they don't want to hear that, just like the leftist doesn't want to hear that. So we're kind of like in this weird position where I think because we have this really accurate, from our perspective, really accurate understanding of like what the state is and what power is, that we're not so comfortable just being on the right.
Hmm.
And the right, they kind of resent that. They're like, look, like this is a war against the left, and you're sabotaging us. Like we need to crush the left. And you're over here talking about the unintended consequences of us crushing the left. There's no time for that. There's an emergency.
Pinochet did nothing wrong. He didn't. The helicopter pilots did. You made me think of Dave DeCamp was on
The man.
Timcast the other night. Did you see this?
I did.
When he was
Tremendous. Oh, he
when
crushed it.
oh yeah, and what's his name? Eliyahu. I call him Yahoo because he's basically like Netanyahu. And
The Zionist agent.
yeah, I
I
mean
thought Dave was extremely gracious.
yeah, but no, what I was gonna say is like Phil just totally shut that dude up though. Like when he was like taking a run at Dave and using Phil as an example, and Phil goes, "Well, wait, no," it just totally shut him down. And you know, I like listening to Phil. He's got decent analysis. I know he doesn't claim to be a libertarian anymore. I don't either. In all honesty, I haven't for a long time. But I mean, ideologically, I say like in theory, ideologically, I'm more aligned with libertarians than anybody else. But in my day-to-day actions, the way I interact with the world, I'm very much more a right winger than I am a libertarian. And it's just functionality of interacting with the world. And that's all it is, all there is to it. So I kind of ride this like Buchananite kind of fence, where I'm kind of like, yeah, I like listening, I like the theory and I like, Lou Rockhold and I like all these guys and I like how they think and how they process information. But at the same time, I really relate to like Orrin McIntyre and his thought process too, you know? So
Okay.
I'm kind of like right there in between and just like I exist in a little bit in both worlds. And, sometimes I feel like libertarians take it too far to liberty and sometimes right wingers take it too far to state power. But I'm like, whatever, as long as I'm safe and my kids are safe, I don't really care. I don't have to be
And
ideologically consistent. I just have to be ideologically alive.
I have a friend. She sent me a political cartoon, and it's like a mom and her little son. And the mom's like drinking coffee, and the mom's like, the boy says, "When I grow up, I want to be a libertarian." And the mom says, "You can only do one." And I was like, "Hey, at me." But I think there's a valid aspect to that critique. But part of what uh, the critique is, and she's more on the left, but I think she kind of agree with McIntyre, who's on the right, that it's like, well, yeah, you have all your ideas and stuff, but if you're not willing to interact with power, if you're not willing to ally with power, you're just going to get crushed. And so, yeah, I totally understand feeling, yeah, you want to remain ideologically alive. That's a
Yeah.
beautiful way to put it.
Yeah, it's
As do I.
yeah, it's more like there are realities in this world that no matter how much I think are unfair or shouldn't exist, they exist. And the state is one of those things. And I'm not going to be one of these. I remember meeting this girl years ago, and she kept telling me we would talk politics, and she would tell me, "Well, I'm an anarchist." I'm like, "Yeah, you say you're an anarchist, but you keep voting for bigger government. I don't get it. It doesn't make sense to me. Like, I don't understand the logic behind this." And one day she came up to me and she was like, I've been thinking about what you said about me saying I'm an anarchist, but voting for Democrats and bigger government. And you're right. It doesn't make any sense." And I was like, all I'm asking for is some consistency here. If you want to be an anarchist, be an anarchist, but how can you be an anarchist and just say we need a welfare state? I don't get it. So that's always kind of been like where I exist in the world. It's like, okay, like maybe I am an anarchist, but I do have to interact with the state. And so now I have to decide what type of state would I prefer to interact with.
100%.
Mm. And part of
Yeah, I
that's
think it's
having
fun.
five kids, and you know that changes a lot in your life once you start having kids.
I think that, yeah, one of the critiques that people like to level at libertarians when we like critique anything that government does, and we say like, well, if you're gonna, you know, if you're gonna have this program, it'd be better if you did it like this. It's like, oh, you just don't think there should be a government, so you should shut up. And it's like, well, I'm not an anarchist. I never said that. But I'm just saying, like, if you're gonna have a government and it's saying it's gonna run an empire, like, are you telling me that whatever it does is the right thing?
Mm,
I'm just saying maybe it would be better if we didn't go to war with Venezuela. That's all I'm saying.
right.
I didn't say end the empire. I just said if you're gonna have the empire, maybe run it more like this. That's all.
Yeah. I had a listener contact me a few episodes ago, and he's like, I want to genuinely thank you for being willing to criticize Donald Trump. And I was like, you don't have to. Why? I just responded back. I was like, it's a really sad world when you have to thank somebody for being willing to criticize a politician. Like, there's something really wrong with that. You know, I was like, yeah, obviously he's not perfect. He does things wrong. Like, I'm going to criticize him when I need to criticize him. Like, some of the stuff he does wrong, the left goes ballistic over, and I'm like, I mean, yeah, he was wrong, but it wasn't that big of a deal. Like, it's like, come on, man, have some perspective. But all right, man, I'm going to let you go. Plug away. Where
All
can
right,
people
brother.
find you and find your work?
So you can follow me on X at WeeksJF, and they can find my articles at the Libertarian Institute and antiwar.com. And in the last issue of the American Conservative magazine, I co-wrote an article with the great Scott Horton
Cool.
all about Trump's Iran policy that I'm really proud of and really excited about. So check that out, especially since uh, another war with Iran might be imminent.
Mm. Yeah, I'm gonna have to definitely go check that article out. I haven't read that one yet.
Yeah,
So,
man, check it out.
all right, brother. Well, I appreciate it. I'm gonna stop the recording and then we'll be going.